Hello, now this is part 2 of the fork rebuild of my ZX7R. Last time I stripped them down and I'd just begun rebuilding the left hand side. Let's get to it. I checked over my stock of 4 outer tubes to pick the best 2. Then I laid out everything else ready for a reassembly. I started with the compression damping adjuster, taking it apart, making sure all the oil holes were clear and replacing the O-ring. I took care not to lose the ball bearing and spring that gives the clicks as you adjust it. Put a small amount of red rubber grease on the new O-ring and refitted the spring and ball bearing. It took a bit of fiddling to compress the spring to allow the adjuster part to go back inside the outer body. Then I gave it a mandatory click check. Okay, so now everything's ready. I fed the damper rod assembly into the bottom tube. Then fitted the bottom bolt and tightened it as much as I could by hand. I thought I'd test my luck at being able to torque it up with my wooden dowel technique, but realised I'd need a third hand. Then I remembered I have just the thing. It didn't work, and I could have easily just left that part out of the video, but where's the fun in that? I checked the threads for the compression adjuster and blew them clear with air. Though when I tried to fit it, I could feel a lot of resistance in the threads. I'd plugged it before blasting and painting, but it may have just picked up some surface corrosion after being open for so long. I used a thread gauge to check the pitch and confirmed it was M10 by 1mm. Then I picked up some taps to clear them properly. I didn't want to use the brass fitting itself as it's quite soft and I could end up messing up the threads on those. Not to mention pushing all that corrosion into the oil ways of the damping system. The tap worked a treat, so I blew it clear and tested the adjuster again, and it span on easily. Great. Regardless of how much I blew it out though, there's still a chance crap had got into the damper rod assembly, so I got to work stripping that down to give it a thorough clean. With that nipped up, I wanted to check I had the right number of clicks of adjustment and set it to the standard settings. The manual says I should have 8 clicks of adjustment, and the standard setting is 6 clicks out. Moving on to the seals and bushings, I put fresh fork oil on the stanchion and lubed up the dust seal. A small Ziploc bag over the end stops the seals being damaged as they go over the sharp lips of the tube. I fit the retaining clip next, then fit the oil seal, making sure it had the writing facing down the fork. It took a bit of wiggling, but I got there in the end. The bottom bush was next, so I oiled the mating surface and slid it over the tube. This will need to be driven into the outer tube on reassembly. Finally, I oiled the top bush and fit that into its groove in the top of the tube. I lightly lubed the insides of the outer tube, ready to accept the new bushing, then offered up the inner tube. I used my 43mm seal driver to knock the new bushing in. When these are new, they can be quite stubborn. Then it was the same process for the washer and the oil seal. When I heard the seal was fully in, I could drop in the retaining clip and finally press the dust seal back into place. I checked the free length of the spring, about 328.5mm. Checking the manual, that's pretty bang on standard spec, so that's alright. Then I fit the push rod for the rebound adjuster and measured out some fresh oil. I compressed the forks and began to pour the fresh oil into the inner tube, pausing to pull the damper rod up and down, bleeding any air out of the system. I did the same with the outer tube, purging out any air bubbles. I used a ruler to measure the air gap, which needs to be 110mm from the top of the tube. It was 100mm, so I'll need to remove the excess oil. I got my syringe and marked 110mm on the tube, and lowered it so the line was level with the top of the fork tube, and sucked out the excess. One last check and it was bang on. Before fitting the spring, I span the lock nut onto the damper rod, took the push rod out of the way and used my homemade damper rod holding tool to extend my reach. This is still a bit fiddly and I could really do with a longer one so I don't have to faff about like this. And thus begins the fight to compress the spring to fit the top cap. Every time I do this, I swear I'm going to invest in some proper tools for this job. It's amazing how quickly I forget that pain and go, oh, I'll probably be fine with the whole spanners and prayers technique. With the cap back on, I checked the settings for the rebound adjuster in the manual and checked to have the full range of clicks before setting it to the standard setting of 7 clicks out. And that's now one fork ready to go back on the bike. I slid it up through the yokes, using a flathead screwdriver to spread the clamp slightly. Then tightened up the bottom clamp. I'll wait until the right fork leg's in before torquing everything up, including the top caps and the stem nut. Now, talking of the other fork leg, it's got some catching up to do. I had another go in my baby vise at home, but I'm just not set up for this here, so I'll be getting some help with it, so I can get it reassembled, get it back in the yokes, and finally get this thing on its wheels. Wait, does that mean it's going to be a part 3? Fuck!